Deadpool joins the X-Men, and this comic is amazing. So what this does is this opens up with basically Deadpool coming up with the idea that he wants to join the X-Men. Why? Because basically Mistress Death ran off with Thanos, and Deadpool just doesn't really have a whole lot of meaning in his life right now. So this just seems like the next best thing. So this guy goes to Utopia and meets with the X-Men. Now, a little bit of explanation here. At the time this story is being written, Marvel is dealing with something called Dark Reign. In effect, Norman Osborne, the Green Goblin, had basically taken over S.H.I.E.L.D. after the events of Secret Invasion. He renamed S.H.I.E.L.D. to Hammer, and then essentially just started going after all the superheroes. So pretty much all superheroes are either underground or locked up in some detention cell somewhere. The X-Men had taken off to an island off the coast of San Francisco called Utopia, where they were allowed to operate outside the laws of the United States. So Norman Osborn couldn't go after them. Back into the story. So the thing is, when Deadpool shows up, Cyclops is just like, absolutely not. That's never going to happen. You are never going to be an X-Men, right? It is the comic equivalent of when the X-Men were hiding in the Deadpool movie because they didn't want to be spotted by him. But the funny thing about this is that when Deadpool leaves, Wolverine tells Cyclops, that was kind of a mistake, man. And Cyclops is like, why? And he's like, I mean, look, dude, Deadpool's crazy, but if he's part of the team, he's at least a kind of crazy we can monitor, right? This guy's life is a complete and total disarray, and the schemes of Deadpool make sense to nobody but himself. So do you really think it's the best idea to tell a guy who's hell-bent on becoming part of the X-Men that he can't be part of the X-Men and then send him out into the world? And so in the middle of their conversation, Dagger kind of speaks up. Now, Dagger's not overly important. This girl has the power to emit light. She's like the least interesting character ever. But as one of like 3 instances of her being relevant in the history of Marvel Comics, she speaks up and she's just kind of like, well, what's the big problem with Deadpool anyway? And they're like, everything is the problem with Deadpool. Like, literally, this guy's insane. Like, this guy's absolutely nuts. But her whole thing is like, but I mean, all of us here all have a record. We've all got a checkered past. We've all done some sketchy stuff. So wouldn't we really just be like hypocrites if we tell him because you're crazy and kind of sketchy that you can't be a part of this crazy sketchy group? And they're just kind of like, I mean, I don't see a problem. And so you basically pick up with Deadpool, who is watching as this sort of interview goes down. And this interview deals with a guy named Kincaid. The whole idea behind this is that when the X-Men left the United States and took off to Utopia, this guy, being a father, is making this argument and saying, this is an issue, because what he had done is he had basically tried to file a lawsuit, tried to use the courts in order to force his daughter to be turned over by the X-Men back to him. But because of the fact that Utopia is outside the United States jurisdiction, it would be like the United States courts trying to force China to do something, right? Like, it's just not gonna happen. And so that's why this guy says, essentially, I've been told that as a parent, I have no rights for recourse because California law evidently does not apply to the X-Men's island stronghold. And so when the question is asked by the press, which is kind of eating all this stuff up, right? Do you blame the X-Men for this? What are your personal feelings regarding this? He says, let me be clear on something. I'm not anti-mutant, I'm pro-parental rights. My daughter is a minor. She's been transferred from what was initially described to me and my ex-wife as a quote-unquote school to some sort of military compound, and I'm being blocked from visiting her. It's just that simple. And so when the question's asked, well, if the courts aren't gonna work for you, what are you doing instead? He's like, this. I am using the press to my favor. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that the X-Men at this point in time have continually been public enemy number 1 in the United States, the most despised group by normal human beings out there. So as you can imagine, this guy immediately shoots to the top of just media outlets everywhere. And that's where he says, I'm calling on congressmen, I'm calling on congresswomen, I'm calling on governors, senators, the whole 9 yards, and I'm calling on you, the average people, to do something about this. And so the X-Men, of course, pick up on this, and they're just kind of like, okay, so like, what's this guy's deal? And they're like, well, this guy's Ellis Kincaid. He's 48 years old. He's from Portland. This guy's basically divorced. His wife took everything. His company's going belly up. But curiously enough, 4 days ago, he basically got some kind of a massive payout by what's called United Holdings Limited, a distant subsidiary of Oscorp. This guy's being funded by Norman Osborn to effectively launch a smear campaign against the X-Men. But as they're having this sort of conversation, that you have Cyclops, who's just like, okay, so what do we do about Deadpool, right? Like, we have this whole thing going on here, so now we have to worry about this, but like, as far as Deadpool goes, what's the whole plan? The funny thing is, all this is going to come together. Now, the funny thing is Deadpool basically just kind of ends up in what's this just abandoned, nasty looking, sketchy pool area, and he's like, yep, this'll do, right? Basically, it's one of his bases, right? This guy's got little bases all over the place, guns, ammo, the whole 9 yards. But switching back to the X-Men, Cyclops and Wolverine go to Domino, and they're like, so you need to be a chaperone, and you need to keep an eye on Deadpool, and we're gonna go send you to meet him because we want you to extend an invitation for him to join the X-Men. Now, she asks why, and they say, because you have history. And in fact, they do. Going back to New Mutants issue number 98, when Deadpool was first introduced, when Rob Liefeld was working on the comic and is apparently retiring from a character that he hasn't been involved in for like 30 years, when he introduced Deadpool to comics, he was very much a kind of anti-hero, right? Very similar to like Wolverine. But in that comic, he encountered what he initially thought, or the person he initially thought to be Domino. In reality, it was actually Copycat, Vanessa Carlyle, who is basically like Mystique in Marvel Comics, except she doesn't just copy your physical form, she also copies your powers. She's really, really awesome and ridiculously underused in Marvel Comics. But like, that's the kind of history they're talking about. And there's been other stories that have gone on in Marvel Comics between the old New Mutants number 98 and the time this comic was written that saw Deadpool and Domino either working together or facing off against each other or something along those lines. And so at that point, you transition to Deadpool who's on a rooftop and basically just kind of like seemingly planning a hit of some kind when he's suddenly met by Domino. Now, what we end up doing is kind of jumping back and forth for a second, because when Domino arrives, you jump back to later on that day when Cyclops asks the question, so how did it go? And she's like, not well, like I made the offer. And that's when you kind of jump up to what's happening, right? The moment where she met with Deadpool. And it's just kind of like, okay, so here's the thing. I've come to offer you a spot on the X-Men. And his answer, no, you didn't, right? You came here to kill me because Cyclops sees me as what's basically a loose thread out there that he would rather have all tied up, right? Just literally have me out of the picture, have me axed, because then he doesn't have to worry about me. And she's just kind of like, no, I mean, we're friends, right? You got it all wrong. He was like, no, we're not friends. And he's like, so here's what you're gonna do. He's like, you're gonna take a step back. And she's like, am I back far enough? And he's like, no, you're gonna take a few more steps back. And then it jumps to a conversation with Cyclops where she asks, like, did you know about the pancakes? And he was like, what are you talking about? It turns out earlier that morning, Deadpool made 372,844 pancakes and filled the pool with the pancakes that he made. So when Domino was taking the steps back, she was standing on a skylight. Deadpool shoots it out from under her. She goes crashing down and lands on the pancakes. At the point when she's talking to Cyclops, she's incensed. She slaps the guy across the face and she's like, I could have been crippled or killed, right? And so like Deadpool's like, okay, look, so here's the thing, right? Like when he's talking to her, he's like, look, here's the thing. Yeah, we're friends. We're cool. The reality here is that if you were actually here to take me out, Cyclops would have sent you a secondary team that he didn't tell you about, and potentially even a tertiary team. But the fact that nobody responded here shows that you were just here on this mission on your own. So, have you had breakfast? And like the two of them sit down and like eat pancakes, which makes perfect sense. Why would you waste 372,000 pancakes? That's ridiculous. But here's the funny thing, right? He says, I'll join the X-Men, but only on one condition. And that's where Domino's like, he wants to wear an X-Men uniform. Now Cyclops is like, I mean, we don't really have any spare uniform. She's like, no, he wants to wear his uniform that he made, which is actually kind of awesome. Literally, it's just the X-Men uniform, but it has Deadpool written on the back. And so, like, literally Cyclops is like, all right, if that's the worst of it, that's fine. She's like, no, you don't understand how bad this is going to get, right? Because Deadpool's told it's probationary status, meaning that he has to basically demonstrate that he would be beneficial for the X-Men before they officially make him part of the team. And so he's like, yeah, man, I can definitely show Cyclops my moves. He's like, in fact, I got a little bit of something going right now. He's like, you know who this guy is? And he shows her Ellis Kincaid. And she's like, yeah, Cyclops is basically dealing with that right now. You know, like it's going to blow over within a few weeks. He's like, oh, it's going to blow over a whole lot sooner than that. And she's like, what are you talking about? And he was like, I'm going to waste that dude. And by waste, I mean assassinate. Problem solved. So what Deadpool is planning to do here, just to make sure this all makes sense, that right now, a human, a normal human, is speaking out publicly against the most hated group in the United States. The plan of Deadpool is to go after that guy and publicly waste this guy in the name of the very group that he is speaking against. It is going to create a total firestorm for the press. So Cyclops does the only thing that seems to make sense, that Ellis Kincaid gets a hold of the X-Men compound. He starts talking to his daughter, Mercury. Now, their conversation isn't really relevant outside of the fact that she basically says, you were never really much of a father, you were never really around, that kind of thing. Like, I don't know what your scheme is here. You're probably just doing it because Norman Osborn offered you a payday, you need the money, and so you just took the deal. But then you have Cyclops, who takes the phone from Mercury, and he's like, look, man, here's something you need to know. Like, you are aware who I am, right? Ellis is like, yes, I know who you are, you're Cyclops, that kind of thing. He's like, somebody's coming after you. Now, here's the thing. This guy takes it as a threat, which kind of makes sense. Nothing that Cyclops is saying is an intelligent thing to say. But the kicker about all this is that if, like, Captain America was saying it, it would be treated completely different. But this guy, with everything going on, Cyclops is like, you're in danger, sir. He's like, someone is coming after you. And it's just like, literally one of the guys runs in and it's like, Cyclops, stop talking. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, this guy's on television, man. This phone call is live on national TV. So it sounds like you're threatening this man's life on national television. It just goes from bad to worse. Now, the kicker here is that ultimately Domino ends up tracking Deadpool back down again after having come back to Utopia to explain everything that's going on. Now, the kicker about all this is that Cyclops starts to put two and two together, right? Knowing that Deadpool is gonna go after Ellis Kincaid, he asks the question, has Domino found Deadpool yet? Because again, like, she's already left the Institute on Utopia, she's going to find Deadpool a second time. The answer is no. And it's like, but they're broadcasting live. And he's like, yes. And he's like, tell her to go to that building right now, because that's where Deadpool's gonna be. And so literally Ellis like asked the question, he's like, so you're sending someone after me to shut me up? Is that what you're saying? The whole time Norman Osborn's watching this, and he's like, oh, this is absolute perfection. This is fantastic. Everything that I could possibly hope for, right? Cyclops is trying to play the good guy here and just saying, no, man, you're misunderstanding here. What I'm saying is someone out there who's extremely dangerous is coming for you. He's not an X-Man. But then like, the whole thing ends because Deadpool shows up and he's like, out of the way, ding dong. Life lesson time, Kincaid. This is what happens when you mess with my people. And he's like, he's literally got his whole garb that says X-Men on the front of it. And he's like, is that thing on? And it's like, hey, Cyclops, your worries are over, buddy. I got this. He's got like a gun to this guy's head. It's absolutely nuts, right? Like, Deadpool is just creating this horrible situation for the entirety of the X-Men, making things worse and worse and worse, right? So Deadpool shoots the camera, right? He takes that thing out, and then he gives Ellis Kincaid a choice. He was like, you have an option, man. Do you want to see it coming, or do you want to turn around, right? I mean, it's a pretty brutal choice, but a choice nonetheless, right? But Domino contacts Cyclops right at that moment and says, I'm on site, right? And because Domino's ability, her mutant power, is to bend luck to her favor, like the biggest MacGuffin ever, which Marvel actually uses really, really well. It's one of the reasons why her character has remained so popular over these like 40 years or however long it's been since their character's basically been around, that she fires off a shot which takes out one of the lights, which lands on Deadpool, which momentarily basically keeps him incapacitated. This allows Ellis to essentially escape. And then Domino shows up and uses her ability, basically her feminine wiles, if we want to call it that, in order to ensnare Deadpool, because the reality here is this guy's had a thing for her for quite some time, right? She's got that whole, like, My Chemical Romance, I definitely have daddy issues type of vibe going on. It's really, really sexy. But the thing is, like, the two of them kind of have a conversation, right? Almost 20 minutes later, they're just sort of talking, and then she feeds him roofies. And when that happens, of course, it knocks Deadpool out. Now, most of what you're seeing happening here flies in the face of Deadpool's normal abilities, right? His healing factor would easily negate the effects of roofies, but it's a Deadpool comic. Who cares? It's amazing. And so in effect, she's got him under control. She tells the X-Men that once she goes back, the guy's just literally tied up in a bed. And so it's like, what do we do? Like, how do we handle this whole situation? And she's like, I don't know, man. I mean, it's Deadpool. The guy's insane. Like, I don't really think there's any way to reason or rationalize with this guy. And that's where Cyclops is like, that's exactly what I thought. So he orders everybody out except for Wolverine. Domino stays behind and she spies on it, and she hears Cyclops tell Wolverine, I need Deadpool out of the picture. And where Wolverine's like, I mean, like permanently out of the picture, like whack the guy, right? Am I going like full Tony Soprano on Christopher, like at the end of the show? Spoilers for anybody who didn't see the end of Sopranos, my bad. But like Cyclops is like, I mean, as permanently as possible, right? And so with Domino hearing this, she goes back to where Deadpool's being held and frees him. But there's a really, really important thing that happens here, because with the conversation between her and Wolverine, he's like, so why'd you do it? And she's like, he doesn't deserve to be slaughtered, which is a fair point, right? He doesn't deserve to be slaughtered just because of the fact that Cyclops thinks that he's kind of an issue. And Wolverine's like, we weren't going to kill him. I was going to take him on a quote unquote special mission to China, because the reality here is Cyclops doesn't need me for this Ellis Kincaid guy. I'm the guy you send in when you want somebody to be done with all their living. That's what I'm here for, right? We're not going to whack Ellis Kincaid. It would be too high profile, too public, and everybody would know that it's us. So in effect, Domino jumped the gun, right? She basically screwed up, right? And so he's like, did he say anything before he left? Anything that you tell me will help. And her and Deadpool have what seems like this incredibly innocuous conversation where Deadpool's like, I'm terrified of cows. Right? He's like, what are you afraid of? And she's like, you know what? I am not telling you what. And he's like, what are you afraid of? I mean, I'm not leaving until you tell me. And she's like, I'm afraid of chickens. Right? And he's like, so like, why? And she's like, it's none of your business. And she throws him out. Now, here's a kicker about Deadpool. Everything that happens is relevant with Deadpool. It all basically comes together in some form or fashion. As crazy and chaotic as it may seem, it all comes together. That's why he's very similar to the Joker in that way. And so what you get is Ellis Kincaid, who calls Norman Osborn and says, hey man, so like, you got to help me out, dude. Like, I don't know what to do here. And he's like, you're going to see a van pulling up. My guys are in it. Go with them. They'll get you to a secure location. They end up taking him to like the Powell Street station, right? Basically like a train station, a transportation station. And the guy does not feel very secure, right? And even the X-Men are kind of like, this doesn't really make any sense. The guy's a sitting duck, right? If he's working for Norman Osborn and Norman Osborn's goal was to get him to safety, why does he have him there? And then at that point, Cyclops and Wolverine piece together, no, like this is bait. Like this guy's here because Norman Osborn wants Deadpool to kill him. Because if Deadpool kills him in front of the world, like they will think the X-Men are behind it. And that will give Norman Osborn carte blanche to go after the X-Men, because they're like the second to last stop. It's like the X-Men neutralizing them, and then he can initiate siege, going after Asgard and Broxton, Oklahoma. So it's like this really, really cool sort of piecing together of events. Not only that, we also know that he's supposed to sit here and he's supposed to be a sitting duck, because the two guys that are there to protect him, they were just promoted earlier that day. They're fall guys. Right, they're there to basically just look like some measure of protection is available and like they're supposed to die. And so the plan that Wolverine has is that he's rigged the power to blow in 5 minutes. When that happens, him and Domino, as they're making their way through the vents, they'll drop down, they'll secure Kincaid, and they'll get him out. Because what they don't want it to look like is the X-Men are kidnapping him. All this is just because of Deadpool's nonsensical exploits. But here's the kicker to all this, and this is why I told you everything that happens with Deadpool is important. Because as they're making their way through the vents, Deadpool put a rooster in there. And we know that Domino's afraid of chickens. And so she just can't bring herself to move past it. It basically slows them down momentarily. The power goes down just like it was supposed to. And Deadpool, who's riding a train, is making his way to Ellis Kincaid. Now, the kicker about all this is that the guards protecting Ellis end up getting a hold of Osborn, and he's like, go outside, right? Like, go outside into the public. You're gonna be cool. Everything's gonna be fine. Which it kind of seems like that's the case, because even the San Francisco police are not allowed in that area. They're all being held off by Hammer forces, because Hammer in effect supersedes state and local law enforcement and most federal agencies outside of maybe like the FBI, depending on the circumstance. But like Wolverine and Domino are just stuck there in the vents, and Norman Osborn is just waiting for Deadpool to take this guy out. Deadpool at this point makes his way up to a rooftop. Now, of course, this basically leads to Wolverine using his claws to just like rip a hole in the ground beneath him, and him and Domino basically get out. And he's like, dude, I'm gonna take it to the grave, don't worry. There's no way I'm gonna tell Cyclops that our mission was basically screwed up by a rooster. Not a chance. They're never going to hear the end of that, because not only is he going to get chewed out by Cyclops, he'll never hear the end of it. People like every X-Man is going to be busting his balls from now until the end of time, because his whole mission just went sideways due to a rooster. poultry. So it's one of those crazy things, because in that moment, what you end up finding out here is that with Deadpool publicly visible on a roof, right? The general public can see him. Norman Osborn has a sniper stationed in a window that no one can see. So the goal is to have this sniper kill Ellis Kincaid. Everybody's going to assume it's Norman Osborn. But Deadpool is watching as like the X-Men's Quinjet shows up, right? The Blackbird shows up here. Like it arrives on the scene and he's like, okay, cool. So he's like, last words, Kincaid, make him good. Kincaid literally just like just shouts out loud in the face of the fact that he's gonna die, I lied. The whole thing was a lie, like it was all made up. Norman Osborn is like, nope, we're not waiting for that. He tells this guy, fire, right? The guy's like, understood. Wolverine gets there just in time to save the life of Ellis before he can be killed by the sniper. And then he sees Deadpool and he's like, what in the world was that guy shooting at? Deadpool shot the sniper. And so it's just kind of like, okay, like this is sort of wild. Now, Ellis Kincaid is literally screaming at Wolverine, it was Norman Osborn who made me say all those things. And Wolverine's like, we know it was him. And like the response of Ellis, yeah, but like they don't know. The press doesn't know, but I will tell them the truth. I will say everything. Norman Osborn's just like, no, shut it all down. Like literally take away their cameras, the whole 9 yards. The press has no authority here. And so that's where Deadpool meets with Domino, and it's kind of like, okay, so what happens next, right? Cyclops and Colossus show up on the scene, and it's just kind of like, all right, so now we have to neutralize you because they don't know what's going on. And if you haven't figured it out, I will explain it here in a second because it's actually all just a grand plan by Deadpool. It's actually pretty ingenious, but like everybody sees that like the X-Men are now there. And so what you do is momentarily you switch back over to Ellis. Wolverine is there and he's like, okay, do you want to get some really exclusive footage, right? Talking to the cameraman. And he's like, dude, absolutely. Like we're 100% down for that. So Wolverine takes the cameraman. He tells Ellis to tell the reporter everything. So when Wolverine and the cameraman get up to the rooftop, the fight is breaking out between Deadpool and the X-Men. This right here establishes they're not allies, they are enemies. And so as this fight's going on, Deadpool is getting absolutely pummeled, specifically by Colossus, which is kind of amazing to see because literally Deadpool goes to headbutt Colossus with his osmium metal skin and like just shatters his face in the process. Then he just starts like spewing blood all over the front of Colossus. And Colossus is like, what in the heck is going on, right? The whole thing's being recorded by this reporter. They're all just attacking Deadpool as best they can, but he manages to dodge and then appears next to Cyclops with a rifle to his head. And he was like, dude, I gotta ask, man, why'd you do me like this? I'm the best thing to ever happen to the X-Men. The response to Cyclops, you are not now, nor have you ever been or ever will be an X-Man. You are not one of us, Deadpool. It's not gonna happen. And even where Wade is pleading his case, right? Like I made a costume and everything. The response to Cyclops, look at me, man. Deadpool looks at him and he blasts him with his optic beams. But of course, like the battery on the camera dies. Wolverine asks, like, did you get everything? Like, did you get up to the point where Cyclops, and he's like, yeah, man, I got to the point where Cyclops blasted him. He's like, then you got everything. So he sends the guy off. And then he asks Deadpool the question, he's like, you are done, right? And Deadpool's like, I mean, is the camera off? And Wolverine's like, yeah. And he's like, then yeah, I'm done. And so Cyclops, who has no clue what's going on here, he's just like, what in the world is going on, right? The response of Wolverine, we were set up, right? Like Deadpool's been planning every single bit of this, and he did it in order to make us look good, knowing that we were public enemy number one. And the reality here is it worked, right? As far as the general public is concerned, we put our lives on the line protecting a guy like Kincaid, a guy who publicly spoke against us, right? We're heroes again, right? And Deadpool's like, how does it feel, man? Like, how does it feel to be a hero again? And so it's the funniest thing ever because a couple hours later, Cyclops just has to like grudgingly thank Deadpool, right? And even apologize for kind of treating him like crap. But he's also like, dude, just don't ever come back. You know, he was like, after everything that you've done, I can appreciate your efforts, but let's be honest, man, you could have done some much better stuff to demonstrate that you wanted to join the X-Men, but it is awesome, right? Deadpool ends up getting on a bus and basically riding away, but it is a hilarious moment. But let me know what you guys think about this down in the comments section. I love this story, and I will catch you all later. Peace.